Okay, can everyone hear me? Yeah, I guess so. Okay, cool. So the talk is going to be very informal, a bit of a business talk, a bit of a research talk. So it's going to be a bit for everybody here, and that's pretty much the whole theme of things. Developing brain-aligned models of computer vision and why you should care, both as a researcher or if you're in the business world or doing development, anything it is. So to kind of have a general introduction on how I got into vision, and just double check, I have half an hour, correct? So yes. Okay, cool. I like this analogy that always keeps bringing itself up in vision, both in humans and machines, which is what happened in the history of aeronautics. So in this example, you see a hummingbird. The hummingbird has feathers, it has wings, questionably so, maybe many feathers. There are other systems in the biological world, in the animal insect kingdom, that fly in their own ways. They don't have feathers, they do have wings, right? Ironically, in the course of human civilization, we did not come up with anything that looked like a gigantic mechanical flapping bird, right? In fact, the wing mechanic is embedded in almost all of these three systems. The Zeppelin, I think it's an F-117 stealth bomber, and this helicopter. The wings are embedded in different ways, and this kind of raises a question that always comes up scientifically and in a bunch of different talks, this kind of feathers or wings analogy, right? So when you want to design a new system and you want to have some sort of biological inspiration, is it feathers or is it wings? Should you care about it, or and it looks like it's important, like feathers. Put feathers on a human, it's a chicken suit. Human can fly. Put wings on a human, the human can fly, right? So if anyone has to leave, this is the most important slide of the talk. Everything else is just kind of mumbo jumbo around this, all right? Even if you don't work on vision, if you do audition or do robotics or do something that's very different NLP, think about this, okay? This is a take-home slide. All right, so in vision, most of the time, it seems like we figured out that there are certain key principles that you can copy and mimic from biology, others that you can't. I guess the most prominent example is convolutional neural network. I know that the Computer Vision Summit is happening right next door, and there's some people there that maybe we should bring here to know about this, or I'm sure they probably agree as well. Most of the time when you see the success of CNNs, transformer models, all the fancy models that have bizarre and exotic names today, they only mimic processes that are happening in the early stages of the retina and even V1, and they're always copying it hierarchically, recursively, one way or another. It's always, to a certain degree, convolution, habit rectification, and some sort of pooling or nonlinearity. And it's repeated. It's hierarchical. No one really knows what's happening in V2 before IT. There's some educated guesses, but we don't have a theory or like even a mathematical equation like for V1 where we can say, this is what's happening. This is what's happening. It's edge detection, for example, right? And people have won Nobel Prizes actually doing experiments, ironically, on cats in the 60s and the 70s, the Hubble and Weasel, for knowing what happens in V1. All of modern CNN and transformer-based technology stems from those type of developments in neurophysiology. That was done about 50 or 60 years ago. So if we, hence the title of the talk, keep investigating, both as a company and the research community, what's happening further along the visual cortex, you'll probably have better computer vision models in general. There's some pros and cons to this. This is kind of where things get exciting. Suppose you have no idea what computer vision is. You woke up from a time machine, and you're like, you know what? All these neuroscientists, they try like to sound smart, Arturo, and all these PhDs. I get a group of people on Facebook. I don't know if someone's from Facebook here. I bring them together. I pay them $5 million, and in 3 or 4 months, they come up with a system like this that can do real-time edge detection, pose estimation, active recognition, even semantic segmentation. We're going to see that in a bit, all in real time, just from RGB sensors, right? So again, autonomous driving, people, eyes open. This is pretty amazing. Again, this is old school. This is also publicly available and for free from about, I believe, 3 or 4 years ago. So just to play devil's advocate on my initial argument of you should think about brain-inspired models of computer vision, I think this kind of proves the point to say you kind of really don't, right? Look at how far we've gone with just a team of engineers that have no idea about how neurobiology works. Oh, so to play devil's advocate to the devil's advocate, I don't know who here is familiar, and you can raise your hand with what an adversarial image is. So we went to, and it's totally fine if you don't. Okay, we're going to go through that. So adversarial images were whether discovered or invented around 2013. It's an interesting phenomena. Long story short, whether you know about computer vision or not, if you specifically engineer a specific type of noise seed by knowing certain constraints about the neural network model system that you have, and you scale it to make it imperceptible and add it on, for example, this image of a panda, all of a sudden the panda gets highly confused and mistaken for a gibbon. And the gibbon is, for those who don't know, is like a monkey. And it's not just, a monkey. You can do the same thing for like a coffee cup. You can fool the machine just by adding imperceptible noise. Again, the noise here, and I'm just going to move here. The camera can follow me if you want to. You can't even detect at the pixel level the noise, correct? For us, it's all the same thing. It's still the same image for us in our retina. Of course, if you evaluate the single values of every single pixels, they're actually very different, but it's a very subtle change. But all of us in the room would agree that these two stimuli are perceptually the same. A machine does not. And this problem has been happening for the past 8 years. No one has solved this. There are certain ways in which you can kind of go around this, and there's a whole field called adversarial robustness. I'm going to talk about why I personally believe the autonomous driving hype kind of scrambled, and when I myself included and other grad students at the time were learning about this, we were like, oh, this is so obvious. This is going to like halt most of the progress in this field, right? And in fact, most of the accidents that happen today are because of situations like these, and I'm going to go over that too. So, someone could argue, Arturo, I have my PhD in computer vision, and I went to Stanford or whatever, and I know about sensor optics, so that's just an image, right? It's static, but if I have a camera, I move it around, there's sensor noise, and there's no such thing as a 3D adversarial object. So some guys at MIT undergrads, you can't see the label. It should say rifle here. They 3D printed an adversarial rifle. So this is a turtle, really, right? For all of us in the room, hopefully. If you don't see a turtle, let me know. We'll do some experiments. But for all of us, ideally, this is a turtle, right? So, but the machine is highly confident it's a rifle. And again, it's the observer is moving the camera. It's different illumination conditions and shading. It's very puzzling, right? This is something that most people haven't even heard of, and it's been around in computer vision for the past 8-9 years. And of course, beyond the jokes of turtles, this happens in the real world. I'm not trying to shed anything on Tesla or other autonomous driving companies, but the times that accidents have happened, this is just a fact. I'm not either saying pro or against. It's because of situations like this. This is essentially like adversarial examples in the wild. So someone hasn't engineered this with malice, but it's more like the detection and the recognition system of these autonomous driving systems are not robust to understand that this stoplight should not be even considered one because it's not operating. In the real world, there's no actual traffic scene. And in this case, it doesn't even know that there's, I think the word is carriage. It's either a truck or a person, and it's going to morph in a bit, or a bus. It's going to see a person in a bit, I think, or the other way around, right? So it doesn't really know, right? There's a person walking towards a car, walking towards a bus. So it can't really make sense of that type of information. You could say this is a sort of adversarial image in the wild, right? A naturally occurring one. So, business side of things, because this is a more type of meeting that's tuned to that, and I think it's important to know. Again, I don't have anything against these companies. I think pursuing adversarial driving and autonomous driving, is great. But this is from a news article that just came out, I think last week, October 14th, 2022. And so autonomous driving hasn't been taking off as much as people would have hoped. And I think, I could be wrong, but one of the reasons is what just happened and what I showed you guys earlier, right? Everyone thinks that computer vision is solved, and for better or for worse, it's not. So, what happens if you can build a machine that can see like a human, right? What can you get out of that? Because so far we do have pretty amazing computer vision systems, and we've seen this already in the talks right next door, that we can do pretty amazing things that 10 years ago no one would have believed, by the way. So deep learning has definitely played a big role into that. But you could do stuff that prevents these type of adversarial type errors, and in some cases are even done with malicious intent, right? They'll print a sticker on a stop sign to make a machine or a Tesla or any other autonomous vehicle think it's a sports ball or any other thing. But you could also do other things that are not just about autonomous driving, such as do reverse image search. I know Shutterstock, they have something similar as well. They were talking about that earlier. That you can also do even if you don't have a robust system, which is still pretty amazing. But in radiology, this is also one of the key examples where it hasn't taken off yet, because you still see machines picking up on spurious correlations and doing misclassifications for something it shouldn't be, right? I think there was a study that said the machine was getting almost all of the diagnosis, something along these lines, correct for malign breast cancer, but it was going off of just an F or an M in the top left corner of knowing it was female or male for a specific scanning of a patient, something along those lines. But it wasn't really analyzing the breast in itself to compute its decision. So these things still do happen. And of course, a moonshot goal that we have is doing something like visual rehabilitation with VR. Imagine you could treat depression by showing a person a specific type of image that maximally activates responses in the brain. Again, that's almost futuristic, okay? Very few research labs in the world can do that, and there's probably just one or two that are doing this at the moment. So for that to be commercial, there's probably a lot of like runway to go, maybe like 5 or 6 or 10 years. Of course, again, to play devil's advocate and no one leaves the room all like, oh, well, computer vision is never going to be solved. And I have an interesting anecdote that is actually not mine, but I saw a talk the other day that someone at Google, again, not saying better for worse, but someone at Google was arguing that adversarial examples are going to be solved. It's something that it's never going to exist because humans are robust, right? They're like, humans are a perfect detector. Humans are unfoolable. And that's actually incorrect. Humans are foolable, and here's one example. This is kind of like an adversarial example for a human, if you may. If you all look at this orange dot, and again, I'm flickering between two stimuli, you shouldn't be able to tell the difference that the image has been manipulated. The moment you break fixation and look out of it and look at this gigantic red circle, you can notice that the image has been morphed or just kind of, it's been like sent through a blender, it's been texturized. It's very subtle to see. I'm going to actually move back to without the red circle, but not just in this region, but essentially everywhere out in the periphery. So everywhere that's not the fovea, so everywhere out of here, the corners have been distorted as you flicker between the original and the morphed image. And that also explains some differences between the high resolution processing and the fovea, and in the periphery everything is either jumbled or blurred. Okay, so humans aren't perfect. That's the bottom line from this kind of interesting experiment. So yeah. All right, so maybe, I don't know how much I should talk into the research side of things, because I think the later part of what the company is doing to kind of solve these problems is more interesting, but I'm just going to give you a flavor of the research that we do to solve the whole adversarial vulnerability problem. So with Ann Harrington, at the time when we were at MIT, we were thinking about this illusion and how could you maybe replicate this in machines too. And we found this interesting case where a group of scientists had used an adversarially robust model, and they synthesized a new sample. So imagine GAN, imagine DALI, something like that, to keep things simple, that matched the feature activations of this model for a specific query image. And then we said, this turtle looks very different than this one, but it kind of looks similar, but it's not the same thing. I wonder, maybe it kind of evokes the same type of illusion that we saw a while back, right? And it's funny, this illusion was discovered about a decade ago, 10 years ago, and never really took off. And we found that in adversarial robust systems can actually reproduce this illusion quite interestingly. So of course, easier said than done. And how do we do this? Maybe I'm going to skim over the details, but you have to find a specific function that mimics how the visual cortex is processing an image, whether it's in the fovea or in the periphery. And if you find that function, whether it's by an equation or a gigantic deep net, you can synthesize a stimuli that matches its feature activation. So for those working in embedding spaces and that type of argument, like you find embedding that matches the original query embedding from a specific noise sample that you iterate over. You optimize over the image and not over the deep net in this. And how do we do this? If we want an even more pictographic example of how we approach this problem is, this is our query image. We start with a noise seed. You get a deep network, whether it's ResNet, whether it's a transformer model, whether it's anything you want, okay? You find an embedding somewhere in the depth of the layer. You ideally want to match the feature activations from your query image and the noise seed. And as you iterate, that's how you kind of get something that looks very similar like the original. Okay, so this is more for the research folks in the crowd in case someone's curious how to do that. This is how you synthesize these type of samples. And then the greater question, again, this is more the research side than the business and development, is how do you actually test this? And I think this has come up in informal conversations earlier today. And just in general, when I've given talks, people always ask me, Arturo, when you say CNN, how do you, or transformer or anything, how do you actually verify and say it's biologically plausible or brain aligned, right? It's not easy. You can't just open a human brain and say, let's look at the weights, right? And let's kind of compare that to like artificial neural networks that you can do with those, right? So this in itself is also very challenging. So we do something called psychophysics. And again, raise your hand if you know what psychophysics is or you've done it before. Okay, cool. So we're going to learn something new today then. Psychophysics is, as my advisor would say, the physics of psychos. But really, it's you do it, this is a joke, bad joke. But really what you do is you have humans do experiments and you want to probe manipulate a specific variable and see what the response is. And this kind of is a play of words of psychology and physics because you want to fit a function as you manipulate a certain stimuli, for example, get some sort of response and model a behavior. So that's what we did with Jonathan and other folks and Ann, and we're going to do the experiment together. I'm going to put this in HD. So no cheating, no moving your eyes, and let's start over. So everyone has to look at the center, and you have to say from the 3 stimuli, 1, 2, 3, which one was the oddball, and keep it for yourself. I'll say a lot. 1, 2, 3. You have to guess, by the way. You can't say nothing. 1, 2, 3. I think that was 1, right? Again, you can't move your eyes. 1, 2, 3. Very difficult. Let's guess 2. 1, 2, 3. Very difficult. Let's guess 3. 1, 2, 3. Also very difficult. So I'll shut up. I'll let you guys do this. That one was easy. That was 2. Maybe that's the last one, I believe. Okay, so yes, question, please, yeah. Oh, wait, could you repeat the first part of the question? Yeah.
The reason we are confused is because the embedding of those 3 methods are similar.
Yeah, that would be the first part of the logic of the scenario, but you're correct. If the stimuli in the embedding space of the deep net and potentially also your brain, if they're very close to each other, it should be very difficult for you to tell the difference.
That serves to prove that a similar process happens in the brain as it does with guns.
Well, that's the leap of faith, but in the paper, this is not a science talk, but in the paper, there's more details of how we approach that, and it's there. It was published in ICLR earlier this year, and you could give it a read, but there's one next slide that is hopefully going to answer your question in a more precise way, but it's a very good point, yeah. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Next slide. Okay, so this is the money shot slide where ideally we kind of address this interesting question. Again, we only have 12 more minutes, so I'm just going to jump to this very fast. But the long story short is, in the blue curve and the magenta curve, when you superimpose them, you see that humans are just as confused for stimuli generated from this adversarially robust network and stimuli generated from this model, this illusion that was discovered about a decade ago. So that's a long story short. And we have a control condition here, which is in red, where and this is kind of the interesting thing, if you synthesize stimuli from a deep net that is not adversarially robust or adversarially trained, you get something that looks like noise. So many people, one of the best tests of is my model human aligned or not is do synthesis on your object detector from a specific embedding space and try to match the features. Most of the time, if the model is not human aligned, you're going to get something that looks like this. Hence, adversarial images popping up most of the time in many detectors. I think this is a very obvious control. It's not so rigorous as maybe having something more fancy with another texture model, but this is the general idea. Humans are just as confused for these 2 types of families of stimuli, and hence the conjecture here is that it's a necessary but not sufficient condition that the deep net that's adversarially robust is somehow aligned with whatever is happening in the visual periphery of a human observer. The goal of the experiment at the beginning and of this paper was to try to find a way in which how humans, because humans are adversarially robust, how does this emerge? This is orthogonal to the talk, but humans don't do adversarial training. That again, this is another, again, tangent, but adversarial training is, imagine feeding that image of a gibbon in your training data set that is obviously not a gibbon and relabeling it and correcting it. Humans don't look at this coffee mug and say, is this a bike? No, it's not a bike. It's really, I'll add some fictitious noise, but it's really a coffee mug, right? Humans don't learn how to see like that. The scope of the paper was something with essentially the interplay of foveation and peripheral vision, eye movements, and robustness, and maybe how you could in the future deploy this type of mechanism in active vision for autonomous driving. So that's very minuscule in this paper, but that's the long-term horizon of what we want to do. Okay, just shifting gears and going a bit faster because we have 10 minutes and I also want to leave room for questions. Who has heard about transformers and transformer models? Raise your hand. Okay, so transformer models are like the new thing, the new kid on the block. They're supposed to be better than CNNs for almost any task you can imagine. They stemmed from research in natural language processing, actually, but they've been adapted to vision. And a question that earlier this year and later last year has been popping up is, are visual transformers a good model of ventral cortex, of the ventral stream? Like, do they actually behave somehow like how we process visual stimuli? So we tried to answer this question with William Berrios, who at the time was an intern at MIT. He's the co-founder of the company with two other folks at Harvard, by the way. And we tried to test this idea, right? And again, this is maybe huge or small glimpse at what a transformer is, but the long story short is it's a model that doesn't use this kind of same type of convolution everywhere. It's actually very, it doesn't have a weight sharing specific type of principle. It's very partitioned. It uses the patch embedding. It uses this specific one, multi-resolution, and it uses attention a lot. And I'm sure some of you have heard this buzzword come about. Use attention, attention. Attention has been revolutionizing computer vision as well. So we trained this model, and we submitted it to BrainScore, going back to what makes a computer vision system, or how do you test if the computer vision system is aligned with a human brain or not. We just saw an example with perception, which was psychophysics. Right? We all did the experiment together and had similar error rates, whatnot. In BrainScore, what they do is they show a set of images to primates, to actual monkeys, and they're recording the brain activation from the monkey at different parts of the brain in the ventral stream. And then they benchmark the activations of a neural network model, and then they compute a correlation for the same image of the activations of biological and artificial neurons. So ideally, if you have a good model of the ventral stream or ventral cortex, the correlation is 1 or very close to 1. Right? So if you have a good model of V1, your brain score would be something like 0.8 or 0.9. If it's a terrible model, it will be like 0 or 0.005 if you're like at chance. So this is kind of one way to assess biological plausibility. So we entered this competition without hoping much, and William at his third or fourth try, we ended up rating second or third along a pool of like 200 folks. Now we're 6th in the leaderboard, but people all over the world. William was doing this from Peru in his house in his mom's basement, as I like to joke. And what surprised us most, not just the average score, is that without much fine-tuning or engineering, we ended up breaking a record for V4, and I don't even know what V4 is in the brain. So this was kind of surprising. I think it's we're in this new era where AI is teaching us about the brain as well, because the models are performing so well that, oh, surprise, surprise, no one has like sat down and tried to say what stimuli should I show to model or mimic V4 in the brain or in a deep net to learn certain representations. So this was a bit of a surprise, and I think what was even more surprising too, aside from these, is tying back to the adversarial example stuff, right? What happens now if you try to adversarially fool or attack a model that's brain aligned? Now you see that the attacks start to fool the machine the same way they fool a human, which is kind of cool. So if before you would want to fool this dog for a goldfish, it does morph a bit into a goldfish. Frog morphs into goldfish, insect to goldfish, monkey to goldfish, person to goldfish. A non-adversarially or a non-robust model would still think that these are goldfish when clearly for humans they're not. Other example, and I like this one too, if you for any single image want to perturb it adversarially to fool it for any class, for a brain-aligned model, it does actually morph into the other stimuli. So this is kind of coming full circle with regards to now we have a system that is fooled the same way a human would be fooled. And sure, maybe we won't have the best object detector for autonomous driving or reverse image search or medical imaging, but at least we have some degree of explainability, right? We can say this is why we made this mistake. So, okay, now in the last 5 minutes, to the business side of things and some technology we've been developing too. Maybe I'll leave some last minutes for questions. So, okay, as was said earlier in the introduction, I'm also an amateur artist. This is something that I did. Does anyone want to guess what the name of the painting is or what they see, and you can just say it out loud. Or how does it make you feel? Does it make you feel happy, sad, raged? Do you see a thing? Do you see two things? Two things, okay. Three things. What are the things? And you can guess. Okay. Do you have any semantic association to what these abstract representations would be? No? Okay. Does someone want to guess the title of the painting? Suppose you're playing like with Dali or something. No? Okay. Sorry? Bridge in the water. Okay. Any other guess? Rorschach test? Okay. Okay, so those are two interesting guesses. So the title of the painting was called The Ocean of Peru. There is some sort of fish-like, ocean wave-like element. So for those who were thinking along those lines, that's great. Very interesting. This is abstract. I haven't prompted you with anything, but somehow some of you may have converged in that similar feeling. What I like to know is, has anyone painted something like this before? Because I didn't study art. I have no idea. Maybe someone has, and I'm not that original. Turns out I actually am not. Someone did. Paolo Scegli, this Italian painter, painted something very similar with another type of composition, other colors, but these two forms, somewhat circular, in 1965. So we have a reverse image search application for abstract art. So for abstract art, it's also just very complicated because there is no almost object detection involved, right? You have to do this at the feature space. So this is something we've been playing around with. This never took off, by the way, with museums. With our museums, we talk to them, we're like, nah, you're telling me that I'm a curator, the machine is gonna take away my job. No, that's not the point. We don't want that either. But it's something you can do when you have a brain-aligned model. You make something with Dali. This has been rendered with Dali. I'm sure everyone here has seen this, right? Machine-generated art. Is Dali so original? Well, of course, this is based on a famous painting, but we can find another similar painting in composition. It's like a person, maybe it's facing the other way. But Maurice Quentin did this several years ago in the Rococo period. So again, these are other examples of things you could do when you have a brain-aligned image search, where sometimes object categories aren't even available, right? Maybe this is some other stuff that's orthogonal to the boom of AI-generated art. But now there's been many talks too that have been talking about whether it's for retail applications or for stuff related to reverse image search, image generation, even medical imaging, autonomous driving. Can you even generate your entire data set? I'm sure at this point you probably can. So this generative art landscape is blossoming by a lot. One other application we did is querying like a stable diffusion model and trying to find its closest similar match with a painting that someone else has done. And this is something we're potentially exploring with folks at OpenAI too. And another interesting project, more on the neuroscience side, just to kind of go to the questions, is now we're trying to, this is going to sound hyper-futuristic, okay? But what we're trying to do is, with partners at Harvard, to optimize certain stimuli that will maximally activate your response in the brain as you look at it. So there's been talks about, for example, what makes an image aesthetic? Why do you like what you observe, right? Imagine if you could have a model that can predict for an image that you see with actual biological neural correlates, say, there's a 95% chance you're really gonna find this image attractive, or you're gonna dislike it a lot, right? So this has some marketing applications too. But in any case, it's also interesting because you could use it to treat neurodegenerative diseases as well, and people who have perceptual blindness and face blindness too. So that's kind of it. This is an interesting meme, driving problems in North America versus South America. I'm allowed to make this joke because I'm Peruvian, but we're trying to see how we bridge these two things with brain-aligned models and maybe even collect data from autonomous driving in South America to bring robustness to North America as well. So that's pretty much it. This is a team. I have 1 or 2 minutes for questions, but thank you all for being here, and I'm happy to just answer any of your questions or inquiries. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What about when you showed the panda and the gibbon?
Yeah.
That was a pixel-based adversary.
Right.
That model.
Yeah.
So, say a CNN can't fall to that attack. What if you have like a consensus classifier, group of classifiers? So you have the CNN attack and then like a feature-based
Yeah.
classifier. The feature-based one's not going to be cool. So say you take 3 or 4 feature-based ones, throw them in conjunction. Is that a good defense?
I think so. I think there's some people who actually are trying to, not just in the research and trying to come up with an engineering solution for this, particularly for autonomous driving, where it's like, let's have under the same camera, the same sensor, deploy 4 object detectors, for example, and let's make sure that the 4 agree, right, and have some sort of redundancy on the same camera. So I think there's always going to be, ironically, this moving goalpost of still, you could always find an adversarial example for those 4 object detector models, right? Now there's even research and papers that show that you can create a universal adversarial example, that any image and any classifier is foolable no matter what. So I think the direction that things should go, irrespective of how you solve this robustness problem, is that at least when you perturb and do the attack, that when you look at it, you're like, oh my God, okay, this panda actually is a monkey, you know? Like even I'm falling for it, like as a human, because no system is perfect. So I think that's the point where you really want to get. So not just get the correct predictions right, but the mistakes aligned too, right? If we're all confusing this to either be a coffee cup or, you know, a grenade, for example, right? Okay, it's a passable example, right? But if it's not, then it's like something isn't aligned there. Yeah. I don't know if I answered your question particularly though. Sure, yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Uh, right. Yeah, that's true. But now it's interesting. Now there's ways in which I think there's called black box attacks, in which you can actually come up with another model and train the model to learn the weights of the model you want to attack, and then fool that model and deploy that adversary attack to the other system. Of course, again, the noise patch looks very imperceptible, so that's where I'm going back to the argument of at least you want to align the noise, right, and the error in the same type of way as a human would. So that's kind of, I mean, there's people who've abandoned research in adversarial images because they're like, it's an impossible problem, you'll never be able to solve it, which I kind of agree. Really what you should want to solve is align the errors, you know, fool the machine the same way you fool the human, and then we're good. Yeah. Maybe, yeah. For adversarial attacks? I think there should be. I don't know much about natural language processing, but I think there is, and the analog for that would be something like maybe changing a character in a word. I can't think of any examples now, like maybe for car, you add a D at the end, card, it just goes to something completely different. But maybe when you glimpse or the machine glimpses over the text, it doesn't process it that way. I really don't know. I don't do work on NLP, but I have the feeling there is. But I don't know how that looks like, to be honest. Yeah. Any other maybe final questions? Okay, well, other than that, thank you.